Welcome everybody to the second lecture on theories, models, and levels of communication. So we're going to quickly start by looking at the levels of communication, which as you will see shortly are normally represented by an inverse pyramid. So right at the bottom, you have the sharpest and the smallest group, which is intrapersonal communication. That is when communications happens within oneself. So this is you talking to yourself, rationalizing your decisions, chastising yourself, and so on and so forth. But that is communication that happens within you. The next level then becomes a little bit bigger because it represents interpersonal communication. That's communication between you and somebody else. The third level then becomes small group communication. So you are increasing that circle. Okay, that is more than one person that you're communicating with outside of yourself. And then we have on the next level intra-organizational communication. That is communication that happens within the organization. And then inter-organization communication will then be when the organization communicates to other organizations within that industry. External communication becomes the organization communicating to its stakeholders and its publics. And finally, mass communication becomes the communication between the organization and everybody. Okay, so here is a detailed explanation of what I've just gone through. Okay, it's just a written form of that pyramid. What I want us to look at is communication theories. Okay, now we're going to go way back, right back to Aristotle. Now, this is a very well acknowledged Greek um, scientist, researcher, academic. I think he was an academic. Let's go with academic. Right, so this was in circa 384 to 322 BC. And when he theorized communication, he proposed three elements. He said that communication comprises of ethos, logos, and pagos. Okay, so ethos he theorized to be the nature of or the qualities of the person doing the communicating or the communicator, the source that we spoke about in lecture one. And then logos he theorized to be the nature or the structure and of the content and of the content or the message that is being communicated. And then pagos he theorized to be um, the nature, feelings, environment, thoughts of the receiver or the audience that is getting the message that has been sent. Now, this theory is quite influential in communication, and to date, you can still see those three elements. Remember, we spoke about the three elements of communication in lecture one, and we said that there needs to be a sender, a message, a receiver. Okay, now what is missing from his theory is the medium. Okay, I'm sure you can all pick that up immediately. Right, so let's move on then to Laswell in 1948, who then proposed a formula, what he described as a formula for communication. He said that in order for communication to be possible, you need to identify the following. You need to identify who says what, um, to whom, with what effect. Now, this theory has been quite influential. However, 1948 is a controversial time full of propaganda, and therefore his theory has assumed that communication would always be persuasive. And also, according to his theory, the receiver just has to wait to be affected by the message. They don't do anything. So this was then disproved by Shannon and Weaver in 1949, who then argued that the receiver does something actually. They decode the message. So the sender would then encode the message, the medium will transmit the message, and then the receiver would decode the message. So they do something. All right, so Shannon and Weaver worked for a telephone company, and they were the first people or the first researchers to introduce the idea of noise. Now, I want to know from you, in your own opinion, and this is an open discussion for our WhatsApp group, what do you think is noise in your own opinion? Hey, now going on from there, Osgood and Schramm in 1993 just built on the theory proposed by Shannon and Weaver and introduced feedback into the mix. So they then say that if the receiver gets the message, decodes it accurately, they then need to give feedback to the sender to say that, okay, message received, and so on and so forth. So they give a certain kind of response to the message that they have decoded. Now, I want you to refer to the public relations handbook that I have given to you in the extra reading folder. You will find within it all these theories that I've just talked through, and you will also find Harrison's 1995 model and McQuaid and Windle's 1993 argument, which actually disproved Glasgow's 1948 theory. And I want you to discuss these ideas. And we're going to open this in our WhatsApp group so we can have a theoretical discussion rather than a practical one. I know we have a lot of practical application discussions in our WhatsApp group, but I want us to just talk about theory for a change and see how that works out. Okay, this is going to be practice for your critical reading skills. So it will be quite important for you to take part. Right, so having looked at all those theories and ideas and arguments and proposals, we can then add them onto that very short communication model that we looked at in the first lecture. And I have condensed it so you can literally conceptualize it as you look at it. Remember, we spoke about the sender, now we're looking at the um, ethos. Is it ethos? Is ethos of the sender. Who is the sender, the communicator's self-image, their personality, their speech patterns, what are some of the environmental factors, and so on, going into that affects the sender. And then we then move from the sender selecting the words that they will use, the content, how they're going to structure it, and the medium that they will use, and how that is going to affect the receiver and how they interpret that information. But also we need to remember there's purpose at the receiver's end with their self-image, how they interpret information from the outside, their environment, who they are, and so on, how all that is going to affect um, the reception of that of that um, message, sorry, of the content. Right, then we also have noise affecting, that is from the latest theory that we spoke about there, and we have a few other things besides, and feedback. Okay, so I want you to take your time and look at that strategic sport communication conceptual framework, and ask if you have any questions. But we have spoken about these theories, and this is how they fit into it. So once you understand all this, it then becomes easy for us to move on and talk about the strategic sport communication model, which is going to basically be the structure of our course. Right, so the first component that is incorporated into the strategic sport communication model is the personal and organizational communication. Okay, so that's the first level of communication within sport management. So you then look at personal communication. How do the people communicate within themselves? That's sport psychology. Interpersonal, how do they relate to each other? The small group, which is the team or the board of directors and so on. And then you move on to intra-organizational communication and inter-organizational communication. Once that is done, you then move out. You branch out to the bigger aspects of communication. You look at the integrated marketing communication structure, public relations, crisis management, how we do research as an organization, how we then handle our mass media, how we deal with emerging and changing social media in sport. Right, so that is it for lecture 2. It's a short lecture, but it's packed with a lot of content and a lot of reading, in fact, and theorizing, which can be a bit challenging because our subject and our course is quite practical. So I want us to be able to relate those two elements. That's why I'm giving you this theoretical part. It's quite a big part of it. Once you understand that part, you then understand the whole process of creating strategic communication plans and what to do with them. All right, so let's move on to our lecture 3 and look at communication as a strategic management driver. So what do we mean by communication as a strategic management driver? Well, what I'm basically saying is that communication strategies need to be incorporated into management. So when the managers are sitting down to do their annual strategic plan, they need to have communication as part of that discussion. All right. So communication is therefore arguably a corporate management tool. Why? Because it's used to build and maintain relationships with internal and external stakeholders. You need it to communicate within the directorate and the subsystems of the organization. So you need the decision makers to use communication to utilize intra-organizational communication to communicate with the subsystems of the organizations, who are the people who do the actual physical grunt work that produces the products and sells them and keeps the company going. So that communication subsystem is quite important to the existence of the company, and also it then discusses how the organization is communicated to its external stakeholders. Now, I won't take too long on this because it's things that we have done together. So you cannot say we do not know this because we have done this together in a previous course. Right. So what that means, if communication is part of management, that means that it needs to be involved with the mission and the vision statements. Right? We know what the mission and the vision statements are and how what they mean to the company. Communication need, needs to be put into the thought process of this mission and this vision. They need to be communicated throughout the organization. Everybody needs to know what the company is, what the mission is, where it's going, and only a solid communication system will communicate that to everybody within the company and everybody outside the company looking in or who has stakes within. Right. So, that being said, the first phase of a communication plan starts right here with the SWOT analysis. Again, I won't take too long on here because we've done this time and time again. You know how to do a SWOT analysis, right? So you need to be aware and you need to investigate and be brutally frank about the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats that the organization has or might face. Now, here's another assignment. Too much? Yes, I know, but these are two lectures, so take that into consideration. So, lecture 2 has two questions that we need to deal with, and lecture 3 has this one. I want us to describe what are internal stakeholders and what are external stakeholders. Now, I've left it blank like that because you've done it countless times. Now, I want to see you put it into practice. You could either just choose to be general and just talk about it in general, or you can identify an organization, any organization, and identify its internal and external stakeholders and explain why they belong in that category. Right, so let's talk about publics. Right, so publics are people that can affect or be affected by activities of the organization. Right, so your key public is who your future objective, your strategy, your tactics, the themes, and your messages will be tailored to. So that's your future or your potential market. Okay, those are your public. So they are not yet your consumer. They do not um, amount to any of your profit. They don't like your products, they don't use your products, they don't know about your products, they don't identify with the brand, but there is potential to get them to be your potential market as well. So publics are those who whose participation is required for the communication plan to be effective. So if these publics don't exist, then who are you communicating to? Because the whole point of communication is to make those publics aware of your brand or of your company or your organization. So those are your publics. Right. So what's the difference with communicating to your stakeholders and communicating to your publics? Well, that's easy. Well, your stakeholders are people that you know, so you can target them specifically with emails, with social media, with your website, because they will go to your website. They will come to your company, they will get some brochures, they will subscribe to your newsletters if you have any. But the publics, on the other hand, don't know you. They don't know you exist. So what do? You use mass media, television, the radio, newspapers. You do public speaking events, you do press conferences, you do newspaper and other publications, you do public relations. And what is public relations? It is when you broadcast the presence of your company through cooperation or working with other events or other companies. Okay, so that's the difference between your publics and your stakeholders and how you would reach them using communication. Right, that's it. Pretty short lecture. Don't want to take too much of your time. Questions on WhatsApp, discussions on WhatsApp as we have already agreed. See you all again next time. Bye bye.